Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into conscience today. It's a concept that's been debated for centuries. And we've got
Centuries is right.
a whole stack of sources here from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And believe me, this isn't just some dry philosophical jargon.
Oh, absolutely not.
We're talking about that inner voice we all have,
Right.
the one that tells us what's right and wrong, that nagging feeling or that sense of satisfaction when you do something good. Have you ever thought about, like, where did that come from? What is that?
It is so fascinating how this idea of conscience has just evolved over time, from ancient Greece all the way to modern philosophy. It's like this testament to how long humans have been grappling with the whole question of morality.
Exactly. And what's really cool is we're not starting with the usual suspects like
Yeah,
Plato or Aristotle.
right.
We're going even further back
Way back.
to the ancient Greek playwrights.
The playwrights are a great place to start because
Yeah.
they introduce this idea of conscience as an inner witness, almost like this
Oh, I like that.
separate self that's kind of observing and judging our actions. Think of it like the chorus in a Greek tragedy commenting on the hero's choices and struggle.
Okay. Yeah, I'm picturing that now. So even in its earliest form, conscience wasn't just about, like, following rules from outside. It was about this
Hmm.
self-awareness and reflection, like looking inward.
Yeah, exactly. It was about recognizing that inner struggle between right and wrong, right? That internal dialogue we have with ourselves. But then St. Paul comes along, he
Oh,
really shakes things up.
oh, here we go.
Yeah, he links conscience to moral law.
So we're jumping ahead a few centuries now.
Yeah, we're fast forwarding a bit.
Fast forwarding. Okay. Tell me more about how Paul changed the game.
So, Paul suggests that conscience is how we inherently know right from wrong, even if we haven't been explicitly taught. It's not just about judging our past actions, it's more like this guide for future ones. He even used the term legislative conscience to describe this active role in shaping our moral choices.
Okay, so conscience is evolving from this
Yeah,
passive observer to the
yes,
active lawgiver.
exactly. And that brings us to another intriguing figure,
All right?
St.
Saint
Jerome,
Jerome. Oh,
and his idea of synderesis.
synderesis. All right, so we're adding another term to the mix now.
Oh, yeah.
This is where it gets interesting.
Synderesis. This is where things get really interesting. Jerome described synderesis as the spark of conscience, an inextinguishable part of us
Okay.
that pulls us toward the good. He even envisioned the soul as having four parts, with synderesis symbolized by an eagle soaring above reason, spirit, and desire.
Whoa, that's a powerful image.
Yeah, it's beautiful imagery.
But hold on, is synderesis the same as conscience? Or
That's the question, right?
is it something different? Because Jerome seems to suggest that conscience can be, like, lost or silenced,
Right.
but synderesis can't.
Yeah, and that's a question that puzzled philosophers for centuries. Is synderesis a separate faculty, or is it somehow intertwined with conscience? And how do they work together? This is where the medieval philosophers really dug in, and it's like watching this philosophical wrestling match.
Okay, all right, let's get into the ring. Who are the key players in this medieval showdown?
Well, we got to start with Peter Lombard. He may not have gone into a lot of detail, but by highlighting Jerome's work, he really set the stage for this whole discussion.
So Lombard was the one who threw down the gauntlet, who picked it up.
Stephen Lampton, he really ran with the idea of synderesis, seeing it as this constant force, battling our desires, always trying to steer us towards the good. And he even connected synderesis to practical reasoning, arguing that it's how we grasp these general moral principles.
So it's not just about, like, gut feelings.
Right.
It's about using reason to understand what's right.
Exactly. And then we have Philip the Chancellor, who really tried to, like, systematize this whole synderesis conscience relationship. He wrote the first real treatise on the topic. He really tackled those questions about
Right.
what they are and how they work.
A true trailblazer. So how did Philip distinguish between synderesis and conscience?
Well, he argued that synderesis is this habit-like power innate to us that pushes us towards good.
Okay.
Conscience, on the other hand, comes into play when synderesis interacts with our free will. It's about applying those general moral principles to specific situations.
So synderesis is like the compass, and conscience is like the navigator, using that compass to chart a course.
That's a great analogy. And here's where Philip throws in a real curveball. He argued that conscience, unlike synderesis, can be wrong.
Wait, so we can be mistaken about what's right,
Mm-hmm.
even when our conscience is speaking to us.
It's tricky, right? But remember how Langton connected synderesis to these general principles?
Right, yeah.
Well, Philip argued that conscience takes those principles and applies them to specific cases, but our reasoning process can be flawed, leading to errors in judgment. He even gives this example. the people condemning Christ.
Right.
Their synderesis might have provided the general principle that false prophets should be punished, but their reasoning about who was a false prophet was totally flawed, leading to this tragic error.
So even with synderesis as our guide, we can still make mistakes because of faulty reasoning.
Precisely, and that highlights this crucial role of reason and deliberation
Okay.
in moral judgments. Conscience isn't just this mystical voice, it's an active process of applying principles and reasoning through situations.
This is getting complex, but we're just getting started. Now we're entering the realm of the medieval heavyweights.
Oh yeah, the big leagues.
Bonaventure and Aquinas.
Two philosophical giants with very different takes on this whole synderesis conscience dynamic. This is where things get really heated.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay it on me. Let's start with Bonaventure. What did he bring to the table?
Bonaventure, he was representing the Franciscan school of thought, right?
Okay.
He placed conscience within the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we grasp moral law.
Okay.
But he saw synderesis as residing in the will, describing it as this innate desire for what's good.
So for Bonaventure, it's about both like knowing the good through conscience and like
Yeah.
desiring it through synderesis. It's like a two-pronged approach to morality.
Exactly, a two-pronged approach. And he emphasized that both are like essential for living a moral life. But here's where Bonaventure adds another layer
Okay, here we go.
of complexity.
Another layer.
He believed that while conscience is grounded in these innate principles, it's also shaped by our experiences and what we learn throughout life.
That makes sense, right? Like we're not
Yeah.
born knowing the ins and outs of every ethical dilemma. Our understanding evolves, right, as we
Exactly.
encounter different situations.
We learn, we adapt, and that shapes how we apply those basic moral principles. But Bonaventure also recognized that conscience can be mistaken.
Oh, no.
And this is where it gets really tricky.
Tricky, okay.
He argued that even if our conscience is wrong, we're still obligated to follow it.
Hold on. So even if we're making a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
we're supposed to listen to our conscience.
It does seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
doesn't it? But Bonaventure believed that if our conscience is leading us astray, we have this duty to correct it. But until we do, we're bound to follow it to the best of our ability.
So there's this like ongoing responsibility to
Yes,
examine our conscience, to make sure it's aligned with what's truly good.
absolutely. It's not about blind obedience. It's about striving to understand and live by what's right. Now, let's turn to Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican powerhouse. He took a more unified approach, placing both synderesis and conscience within the intellect.
So a bit different from Bonaventure's view.
Yes, Aquinas believed that synderesis gives us this infallible grasp
Yeah.
of fundamental moral principles. It's our connection to a universal moral order, what we often call natural law.
So synderesis is how we tap into that natural law,
Yes,
that inherent sense of right and wrong that exists in the universe.
precisely. For Aquinas, synderesis is the foundation of our moral understanding.
Okay.
But he also acknowledged that conscience can be mistaken, what he called an erroneous conscience.
This sounds familiar. Didn't Bonaventure say something
They did.
similar?
They both agreed that conscience isn't perfect. But here's where Aquinas' view gets really challenging.
Here we go.
He argued that we are still bound to follow our conscience,
Oh,
even when it's wrong.
wait, seriously, even if it's leading us down the wrong path.
Aquinas believed that going against your conscience, even a mistaken one, is a sin.
Wow.
He saw it as a rejection of your own best judgment in that moment, and therefore a violation of your integrity.
So that's tough.
It's a tough one, but the key for Aquinas is the type of ignorance that is causing the error.
Okay.
He distinguished between what he called invincible ignorance, where you genuinely couldn't have known better,
Okay.
and vincible ignorance, where you could have known better but didn't bother to find out.
So if you're just being lazy or willfully ignorant,
Right.
you're held responsible.
You're held accountable, exactly. But even with invincible ignorance, where you might be excused, following an erroneous conscience isn't seen as good.
Right.
It's more like, you messed up, but we understand why. This brings us to a real game changer. William of Ockham, he completely rejected the concept of synderesis.
Okay, Occam's ditching synderesis altogether. That's a bold move. What's his take on conscience then?
He believed we learn moral principles through reason and experience.
Okay.
And he focused solely on conscience as the guiding force in morality.
Okay.
But here's where Octam's view gets truly radical.
Okay.
He believed that following an invincibly erroneous conscience, one where you are genuinely mistaken through no fault of your own, is actually virtuous.
Wait, you're saying that sometimes being wrong can actually be
It can.
morally praiseworthy. That completely changes the game.
It really does. It challenges traditional ideas about moral responsibility and what it means to act in good faith. Think about it this way. If you sincerely believe something is right and act on that belief, you're demonstrating a goodwill even if you turn out to be mistaken. And for Occam, that's at the heart of morality.
So in that example we talked about earlier, the person who gives money to someone pretending to be homeless,
Right.
they're not just getting a pass because they were tricked. They're actually being praised for their good intention.
Exactly. Occam would even say it's meritorious. They could have chosen to be cynical, but they acted on what they believed was right. That, for Occam, is true virtue.
But doesn't that make morality subjective? Like anything goes as long as you can convince yourself it's the right thing to do?
That's a common criticism of Occam's view. However, he didn't believe that just anything goes. He still maintained that there are objective moral principles, discoverable through reason.
So it's more like you have a responsibility to use your reason to figure out what's right. But once you've made that judgment, in good faith, you're obligated to follow your conscience.
Exactly.
And you're even rewarded for doing so.
It's almost like you get bonus points for being innocently wrong.
Wow. I'm seeing how the concept of conscience is so much more complex than it seems at first glance. It's this
Yeah.
intricate interplay of intellect, will, experience, and even divine law.
And what's fascinating is how these different theories of conscience reflect these broader shifts in how we understand human nature.
Right.
The role of reason, the relationship between the individual and divine law.
It's like we've gone on this philosophical journey, tracing the evolution of this idea
Yeah.
across centuries.
And it's not over yet. The debate about conscience continues to this day.
That's right. We still grapple with those tough cases where someone's conscience might lead them to do something that we consider morally wrong.
Right, right.
And with all the advances in neuroscience and psychology,
Oh, yeah.
we have new ways of exploring how conscience works in the brain.
I wonder what Aquinas would think about brain imaging studies as a way to understand synderesis.
Right, or how Occam would react to the idea that our unconscious biases might shape our moral judgments. But before we get too carried away with those possibilities,
Right.
let's take a moment to kind of recap what we've learned
Yeah, let's recap.
from our deep dive into the history of conscience. What were some of the key takeaways that stood out to you?
I mean, honestly, Occam's idea about the invincibly erroneous conscience just really blew my mind.
Yeah,
It challenges our assumptions about moral responsibility,
right.
and it highlights the importance of recognizing the sincerity of people's beliefs, even when we disagree with their actions.
That's a profound insight. It reminds us that while we strive for moral certainty,
Yeah,
we're all fallible beings,
we are.
navigating a world of incomplete information. For me, the biggest takeaway is how much emphasis these philosophers placed on the process of conscience.
Yes.
It's not just a static voice. It's this ongoing struggle to align our actions
Mm-hmm.
with what we believe is right, whether through synderesis, reason, or experience.
Beautifully put. That commitment to doing good, however we understand it, is at the core of what it means to be a moral being.
And what's even more amazing is that these ideas developed centuries ago
Yeah.
are still so relevant to our lives today.
Absolutely.
We're still having these debates,
Right.
still wrestling with those fundamental questions about right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
about how to live a moral life. As we've been exploring all these theories of conscience, it struck me that a lot of them, especially from the medieval period,
Yeah,
are really rooted in a Christian worldview.
it's true. That idea of divine law,
Right.
God's will being like the ultimate source of morality, that played a central role for thinkers like Aquinas.
Right. For Aquinas, natural law was like the key
Mhm.
to understanding how synderesis worked.
Yeah.
But today, a lot of people approach morality from a more secular perspective.
Right.
So how does conscience fit in without that, like, divine framework?
That is a question that is still a sparking debate among philosophers.
Yeah.
Can conscience exist independently of religious belief? Or is it inherently tied to, a belief in God?
It makes me wonder if we can understand conscience in terms of human evolution,
Mm-hmm.
social cooperation, empathy, or even just a basic sense of fairness.
Exactly. Contemporary philosophers are exploring all those avenues, looking at the psychological and social mechanisms that might give rise to our moral intuitions.
So maybe conscience isn't so much about tapping into some external, like, divine law, but more about these deep-seated values
Right.
and instincts that have evolved as part of
Mhm.
being human.
It's a fascinating possibility, and it could help explain why conscience seems to be such a universal phenomenon. across different cultures and belief systems.
It's not just about following religious doctrines.
Right.
It's about those fundamental human drives
Yeah.
to care for others.
To cooperate.
Yeah, to
To
cooperate.
create a just society.
That brings up another interesting point. We often talk about conscience in terms of individual responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
but what about the role of collective conscience? How do societies,
Well, that's interesting.
develop shared moral norms?
Yeah.
And how do those norms influence our individual consciences?
That's a crucial point. We're not just isolated individuals
Right.
making moral judgments in a vacuum.
We're part of these communities
Yeah.
shaped by shared histories,
Values.
values, institutions.
Which can be a powerful force for good, right? It can lead to social progress, movements for justice and equality.
Absolutely. But it can also have a dark side.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
when groupthink or blind obedience to authority overrides individual conscience
Right.
and leads to harmful actions.
It's a constant balancing act, isn't it? Trying to stay true to our inner voice while also recognizing the importance of shared values and social responsibility.
It really is. And that tension between individual conviction
Mm-hmm.
and the demands of the collective,
Right.
it's something we're constantly navigating in our own lives.
Absolutely.
This has been such a thought-provoking journey.
It really has.
From ancient Greece to modern-day dilemmas.
Yeah.
This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for the complexities of conscience.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and I think the biggest takeaway for me is that conscience throughout history has been about this ongoing struggle to align our actions with what we believe is right.
Yeah.
Whether it's grounded in synderesis, reason, experience, or some combination of those.
Mm-hmm.
That commitment to doing good, however we understand it, is what ultimately matters.
So well said. And even though we've covered so much ground,
I know.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore. That's the beauty of these philosophical questions, right? They keep unfolding, revealing new layers of meaning as we engage with them.
Well, dear listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the concept of conscience.
It's been a journey.
We've traveled through centuries of philosophical thought,
Mm-hmm.
wrestling with questions about morality, responsibility, and what it means to be human.
Deep questions.
But this isn't the end of the conversation.
Right.
It's just the beginning.
It is. We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas on your own.
Yeah.
Reflect on what conscience means to you, how you cultivate and follow your own inner voice,
Yeah.
and how you navigate that complex landscape of right and wrong in a world that is constantly changing.
And as you continue on your own philosophical journey, remember to keep asking questions,
Yes.
keep challenging your assumptions,
Keep searching.
and keep striving to live a life that aligns with your values.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning, and keep exploring.